questions and the answers as well. So I'm going to begin by turning it over to Mark.
So, common question. When, this is always a child, when can I get a cell phone? You know how we answer that question? Look at whenever you can afford it. I require them to buy the phone and to pay their portion of the monthly charge. And if they can't earn enough money to be able to pay for it, they don't need a phone. Because I'm not providing phones that they will damage. That question, I get asked that all the time. And when they can afford it, you can put rules on it, about what they can and can't do. But the real question is when can they get one? Well, the real answer is when can you afford to buy one and pay for one? Okay? That's question one.
We also knew, though, that they weren't going to be able to afford it till they were somewhere between 16 and 18.
That's okay. But if you have a really unique entrepreneurial child at age 12 or 13 that might need it to run a lawn business, okay, again, you can put your parameters on what they can and can't do with that. That's the second thing, but who's going to pay for it? I'm not paying for their phone. They get to pay for their phone. And the second question that we commonly get is, when can I get a credit card? And the simple answer, we said, not until you were out of high school. And when you got a credit card, you were solely responsible because you weren't getting my credit card that you could use. This was your credit card. And I wanted it on a statement that I could see. And the expectation was you had to pay this off in full every month. And if they were disciplined enough to be able to pay their credit card off every month, taking care of their own expenses, I'm okay with them having it. But I set the rule that we couldn't, that was a college level type thing or an adult level thing. Those are two quick questions.
Great questions. I have a few questions. First, this might be a generational thing, maybe my generation and below. This might just be something in culture at large. But what are some unwise financial patterns that y'all are noticing in our culture today?
Okay. You want to answer that first, or you want me to answer it?
I can do a couple, but
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things is that they are always convinced they're going to have the money to pay it off the next month. No matter how many, till we're blue in the face, till they've had months and months of having to not pay it all off. And it's not our kids necessarily that we're all that way, but that just society as a whole is that way now, where they just always think that, well, they'll pay it off the next month and then the next month, and they never actually pay everything off. And I think that's a real common thing. And the other thing is I deserve this. And I see that among kids. I see them especially among young adults when they're looking for their first home. They want a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, this and this. And you're just like going, none of us had that when we started out. And, you don't have to have that, but they think, and that's what they want. Or a nice car, they don't want to have an older car. Just all those things is, I deserve this. We deserve this, instead of waiting. Because I think you enjoy it more when you wait and you work for it.
It's helpful.
So you said, I'll give you 3 items. Number 1, borrowing money for college. Completely unnecessary and a horrible idea. We'll discuss tomorrow afternoon all the ways that one can go to college without having to borrow money. But it is a bad idea. And it's a bad idea for various reasons, but I'll give you one and one only. If you come out of college with $40,000 or $50,000 in debt, go back to my $25,000 compounding interest, you have to spend your first 3, 4, 5 years out of college paying off a college debt, but you don't get a chance to invest in your future because you're paying something else off. College, bad idea. And too many parents and way too many kids will borrow money. Number 2, buying a house before you need to buy a house. Simply put, if you're buying a house as an asset, then I'll have a conversation with you. But buying a house before you're married and have 1 or 2 children is really kind of unnecessary. Yeah, but it's more expensive to rent than to buy. No, it's not. And we'll discuss that. It actually, owning a home is a higher cash flow than renting. And that's a big difference. Yes, you do get equity buildup so that 5 or 10 years later, you might have actually made more money than you spent. But they said, but my rent goes up every year. Well, why did your rent go up? I don't know. They just want to charge me more money. No. Insurance went up. Property taxes went up. So the landlord passed that along to you. And the last time I checked, I bet you your tax rate year over year in your house is going up because the value of your house is rising. And unless you are not buying property insurance, commercial insurance for hail and flood and everything is doubled in 5 years. And if you own a house, your insurance is doubled. So it's not cheaper renting. You're just paying a portion of what the landlord is paying. You're going to have to do the very same thing. But number 2 is buying a house too early when you don't need it, because it also ties you down and you don't have the flexibility of moving to where your job or career will go. That's a big, huge mistake that we see. And number 3 is feeling, and it's a takeoff on what Debbie said, as soon as I get out of school, I'm going to get a really nice car. So they immediately start getting on car payments. And they say, well, I can afford a car payment. Well, but they don't understand is that they are borrowing money and they're getting a car that's much more expensive to operate. The cash flow is going to be up higher in the long run, but they don't understand that. But those are 3 things that I see all the time that we see that they come back crying to us when things don't go the way they expected it. I don't like my career, but I have to work to pay off my student loan. Well, yeah, that's what you have to do. But if you hadn't borrowed money, you could have changed your career path, but you can't do that.
And just so people know, tomorrow morning, Mark's going to lay out some very practical advice for wise financial practices. And then tomorrow afternoon, he's getting into things leading to launching a career, or our teenagers or our young adults kind of pursuing college and career and things of that sort. So we're getting into a lot of those practical conversations tomorrow. The other question I have is, they might not know this, but one unique thing about Mark and Debbie is in College Station, basically every friend that I have has been mentored by Mark and Debbie. So they are around a lot of parents. And so my question is, for parenting, what are some helpful and hurtful practices, or wise or unwise practices that you've seen parents utilize with their kids in the area of finances?
I think one of the first things is parents are living in fear of their own children. And that sounds kind of strange, but you do not want your kids to be upset. You do not want your kids to be deprived. You do not want your kids to not have the nicest dress at prom ad nauseum. And so the one thing that I really think is in doing that, you're not training them to be responsible adults, and you're not training them to be sacrificial and to give sometimes when it hurts, and you're also spoiling them and making them feel entitled. Like when our oldest daughter went to college, she had to pay for her own gas. It was just, that's all the things how we did with our kids, but none of her friends had to pay for their own gas. So then when they would ask if they could get a ride home to Dallas with her, she would say, well, if you'll split the gas with me. And they will say, well, they would literally say to her, no, I'm not going to do that. Ask your dad to pay for it. And that was 20 some years ago, that she was doing this. And she called us one day and said, thanks for teaching me not to be so selfish. And this is probably our child who has a little more tendency to be selfish, but she was appalled by the presumption that the kids had. But I think a lot of times you do that because you're afraid to deal with your child who's going to be upset with you, or who thinks they deserve to go to this college that they just have their heart set on when they could go to another one that costs half the price, that kind of thing.
Several. Number one, I would look at the fact that you are afraid of the kids standing out because they sometimes will get bullied or peer pressure. A good example is back to the cell phone. Our kids were like the last ones to ever get cell phones. And they had to buck against a lot of pressure because their friends, we weren't keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak. That's one of the biggest problems with parents is that they won't sometimes make the hard decisions, which are the right decisions, that really place their children in a more uncomfortable spot. Okay, that's, so. Number two, the young people, I know you're going to kill me, they need to work. I don't give a rip about 4.0s unless you're trying to get into Johns Hopkins or MIT or Harvard. No one really cares about your GPA. In most cases, they need to work. Kids should be working from as early on as age 10 or 12. Even if they're just babysitting, dog walking, picking up poop, they should be working. And they need to be working 10 and 15 hours a week through their high school years. And parents aren't making them do that. And that's a real problem. And again, this is a little bit of a difference. You get to North Central Texas, man, these kids don't work at all. They drive nice cars and they get money. Kids need to be working. That is a big thing. And then the last comment that I would make about parenting children here is you need to teach them basic finances. If you're struggling at budgeting, you can be guaranteed your kids are going to struggle at budgeting. But you need to be able to teach them. Once they have a job, one of the first things you need to be teaching them is some kind of concept where 10% is given away to the Lord's work. 50% you can do whatever you want. And the other 40% you're just putting into savings for something coming up that you might need next year. I have a grandson, my oldest grandson, has been told that he can drive when he turns 16. But the parents aren't going to buy him a car. So guess what he's been saving for several years? He's saving to have enough money to buy his own vehicle. His goal is to get an $8,000 car. That's what he's working towards. He's about halfway there. But his parents are teaching him the value of money, because they're teaching him what budgeting is and what savings is. But those are three things that you, as a parent, you need to do with your children.
You need to add what we see in kids who don't work when they're trying to get jobs in the future.
Well, and what we do see, this is a Gen Z problem in that the kids, as they come out of college with degrees, they feel that they are due certain treatment level because they never had to work hard. It sounds like a real odd thing, but when I teach a career class, that this is a really important issue. These graduates come out thinking that life is going to be like taking a test. The boss is going to come and say, here are the 5 or 6 things you need to do. They'll study it and they'll go do it. But the real world is much more ambiguous. They're expecting you to be able to do things. And this is what Debbie's alluding to. These kids have never, ever been taught what a bad boss looks like, what it is to have to skip a softball game because they got called in to work extra hours, or what it takes when you didn't get a promotion you should have deserved because someone else got it. All of these life skills show up when they finish college and they get into the workforce. Man, they're fragile. They're soft. They aren't the kind of employees that you want. I will take tomorrow a high school kid who ran a lawn business, 15, 20 lawns, paid his way through community college. I'll hire that person tomorrow because I know they know how to work. And that's a real big difference between a lot of these people graduating 4-year degrees. They're soft, They're fragile, and most of it's because parents did not demand or teach them in their pre-college years what it was like in the real world. Did I answer your question?
Well, I feel like that hits on the precept principle a little bit, where there's maybe not a precept of thou shalt not pay for your kid's cell phone.
No, absolutely not.
However, there is a reaping of the consequence when you're creating someone who is entitled, who doesn't know how to work, those types of things. So super helpful. Like I said, I love the Q&A always. Alan has the first question. Joey, do we have the microphone? And then after that, y'all can raise your hand, and I'll call on people as I see them.
Can I have a loan? Just kidding.
I was getting ready to say, well, under what circumstances do you want to put your house up for sale?
No, so my question is, would you say that homemaking is more of a principle? And what does that look like in today's society in terms of single or dual income families, and how can we, just some wisdom on that, I guess.
Okay, that's good. You want to say anything on that?
Well, we grew up in the day and got married young, and it was more common for the gals to stay home, and we at that time really believed almost it was a precept, I would say, kind of our group of friends and how
We were
we did
wrong.
things. But I still think I think it's Rocking the Rolls book, but I'm not positive. It said basically that a woman should not work to the exclusion of her home. Does that make sense? That if you work, you should be able to still do the responsibilities that Scripture talks about you doing in regard to your home and raising your children and all of that. And if you work and you can't do that, then maybe you need to step back a little bit. It doesn't mean that you can't work at all, but it does mean that your focus, what the Bible describes as a focus for a woman to be in Titus 2, keepers of their home, loving their husbands, loving their children. But you also go into Proverbs, and it talks about the woman in Proverbs selling linen and doing things like this. So you can work, but it's still a main eye on the home and providing for your family in that way, if that makes sense.
So it's not a precept, so let me kind of give you 3 parameters that can be helpful. First and foremost is there is a certain point where a certain number of children, to care for those children exceeds the income typically of a second person working out of the home. It's pretty silly for you to have a wife working, if we'll use the wife in this particular case, if the $40,000 she brings in is immediately turned around and is spent in $40,000 of childcare. I mean, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You haven't gotten any, and it's not following the principle that Debbie said. So that's number one. There's a line at which a second income becomes silly. Number 2, we have devalued in this society stay-at-home parents, and particularly stay-at-home moms. The value is massive, and we have so diminished that. I commend everyone who are single income families whenever possible, because if they have really done a job well, they're really living in a much more modest lifestyle because they aren't bringing in 2 incomes. So we need to value those who are stay-at-home moms. And then the third concept that you have to kind of keep in mind when you do this, there's also seasons of life. Is it wrong for a newly married couple with no children for both spouses to be working? No, there's nothing wrong with that. And the reason why that's important, and we've said this all the time when we do a lot of marriage mentoring with these younger couples, we encourage you to say, okay, which of the 2 of you is going to be the primary breadwinner? So they raise their hand. You live on that salary, 100%. The other person's salary goes 100% to saving and giving, nothing else. You don't use any of it to live on. And what you do in that 2-year period, 3-year period of time, you build up either your down payment on your house, if you were silly enough to borrow money for college. You use that to pay your college loans off. So during that season, I think it's okay for two incomes to be there. And we have to be very careful that we don't get into this black and white to say those that are two-income families, and there are a lot of two-income families, particularly here in South Texas, there's nothing absolutely wrong with that. But now you get back to Debbie's principle, even in two-income families, we really make sure that one of the parents is still more home-based so that the kids aren't being left. I didn't give you a black and white answer, but I want you to give these parameters.
Thank you. Who else has a question? Rai has a question.
I have a question in regards to debt. My question is, if I have this family member from my family, and he owes me money. And my question is, it's
Your
been
son?
No,
Oh.
it's a brother-in-law.
Brother-in-law, okay?
So he owes us money, and my question is, it's probably like a year and so, and he's like evading paying the money. So, any advice in that regard? As we can just keep pushing, or maybe we should forget about it, or?
Well, first and foremost, loaning money to people within your family is fine. But you also have to accept the fact that if they're unable or unwilling to pay that, you're going to have to show a lot more grace, because you're not going to go and foreclose on their home, or you're going to take their car and repossess it, okay? Which is why I think you need to be wise. First and foremost, I would only loan money to those in my family that I believe have a chance of realistically repaying it, or I really look at it, even though it may be called a loan, it's really a gift, because I don't think they're going to repay it, and that way I don't get frustrated. So that's at the beginning. But now that you're where you're at, you have every right within reason to ask, to have them, what is your repayment plan? What is your strategy? I know you didn't repay it, but do you have a 1-year strategy, a 2-year strategy? You can ask, but you have to then use wisdom to discern, Ray, what's the likelihood they're going to pay it off? And you may just have to treat this as a gift and then walk away. But I'm real careful. Anytime I've loaned money to my family, I knew that the worst case scenario was going to happen is I was going to have to write the loan off. And I've loaned several times money to my children for cars, because they wanted to be able to buy a car. And so most of them paid it off in a year and a half. But I hope I answered your question. I think it's appropriate to ask, but you also have to be willing to recognize that you can't break that relationship, because the relationship is more important than the financial obligation.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question. What if someone in our room is wise with their finances, working hard in their job, and they have family members who are unwise with finances and kind of regularly assuming financial help? Have you ever seen that, or
Yes.
how would you speak to that?
Absolutely.
Well, several of our son-in-laws are having problems with that. I think that, one of the things is you just, as Mark was saying, you just have to be wise whether you loan it in the first place. And then if you know their character, there comes a point where if it's happening repetitively, you have to have the wherewithal to allow them to struggle and say no. And that's a hard thing to do when you've started the game. But one of the things we used to do sometimes with our kids on discipline is we would apologize to them and say, man, we dropped the ball. We have not been disciplining you in the way we should as far as your attitude or whatever's going on. And we made a mistake, and we've enabled you to become this way. So we're cracking the whip after, this situation. And with this family, in one situation I know of within our extended family, they finally had to just say, I was wrong to keep loaning you money, so I cannot do it anymore. And it's been a very hard separation.
So I'll give you 3 kind of principles that you have to decide within it. Number 1 is grace and love, because there are times where you show grace and love. Number 2, you also have to show hard love, which sometimes says, no, I'm not doing it, okay? And then number three, you have to be willing to, what was the third point I was going to mention? Oh, we'll just stay with those two, but there's the hard love, because sometimes you have to say no to them. And I don't want, that's what I say, and I'm not going to rescue you continually. I might rescue you once, but I'm going to come back and I'm going to say, I'm rescuing this one time, but don't count on me rescuing you the next time. Because what I have seen is that those children who get rescued repeatedly, and you will know that there's that tendency that that's what their parents did with their kids during their high school years. They always came to their children's defense and rescued them. Something as silly as the call would come to Debbie and say, I left my homework at home. Can you drive it up here? And you know what the answer was? No, we don't do that. Because we weren't going to rescue them. So rescuing, showing grace is really, really important. And so I think you just have, and then but there are times where there's hard love is necessary. Wisdom will have to dictate.
So if your family member blames you for not rescuing them again, should you feel guilty?
I don't. But then again, I have a low mercy quotient. So.
And we have, one of our son-in-laws has a high mercy quotient, and he's having a real hard time making that step.
Yeah.
So it's almost like if you don't establish those boundaries now, you most likely will have to establish those down the road.
Right.
You will have to do the hard conversation. Is what are you going to do it now, or are you going to do it in 10 years?
That's a great way of saying it. Establish boundaries in any conversation and any money that's being loaned. We always actually, most of every car loan I had within my family, I actually had a loan document they signed. So that what would happen is if they failed to meet that, I'd come back and say, this is what you committed to. And it just gave me something. I was establishing some boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Another question. Rebecca's first. Kevin's next.
So my question is, I loved some of those principles that you laid out with kids of like working jobs, buying their own phone, things like that. And I know I was really challenged in that, just thinking about our own kids. And I guess my question is, let's say you have teenagers or a little bit older kids that like what you laid out has not been the case. It's like, okay, my kid is 10 and has a phone and I'm paying for it. And we've kind of already established some norms. How do you recommend going about bringing in like new principles with your kids? It's like, okay, we're going to change things. That's hard for them. That's hard for you. Like, what does that look like to change course in what you've already been doing?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said a minute ago about how we'd apologize to our kids when we realized we'd slacked on discipline or whatever. You just go to them and apologize and tell them that, we made a mistake. And that is the best thing your kids can hear, because they also need to learn to apologize to their kids down the road or to other people down the road. But if you just say, we made a mistake and we're realizing that this is not setting you up right, so we're gonna change what we're doing. And I can tell you, Piper, that several of our friends' kids weren't very happy with us for a period of time when we taught a class and something changed. But actually, in the end, they usually ended up being thankful.
And the way you implement that is, Debbie was so right, you say, I'm sorry, and starting 12 months from now, 18 months from now,
it's not like
you are going to start footing this. Oh, and when you get ready to upgrade your phone, you better have $400, $600, $800 if you want to upgrade, or otherwise you're going to, but I just lost my phone. That's a problem. You might want to have some money, but what it is you give them some time to get that out. But I will tell you that what children, when they learn the costs of having to care for their own assets, they will be so much further ahead than these soft people that we're watching come out of college today.
I'd maybe also add, trying to cast a vision of the type of a man or woman you're wanting to help them become. Because I think if you just kind of said like, we used to give you a phone, now we're not. I think anyone would just kind of say this is a bad plan.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But if you say, like, even if they disagree with it, saying, like, I want to help you to learn how to be a responsible man or a woman one day, these types of things. And having these visionary conversations doesn't fully solve the problem, but it at least points them in the right direction, I think. All right.
And as you go there, and I'll insert, one of the things we did was a clothing fund. Starting at age 10, our children managed their clothing fund.
We
said,
paid for it.
We paid for it, but they managed it. And I can tell you, it wasn't enough to be able to buy all the things that the kids today want. So come Christmas and birthdays, you can guess what they wanted for their Christmas birthdays was gift cards and cash to buy more clothes. But the difference was they now knew how much clothes cost, and they also knew that they had to make sacrifices. They had to say whether I buy underwear or whether I buy a brand new pair of shoes. And don't get me wrong, when they grew like a weed, we might come in and come to their rescue. But the point was, we were teaching them financial things from early on, and I encourage you. I'm sorry. Your question.
It's a little bit along the same lines. I kind of followed, I follow your belief about the cell phones, though I did not put it into practice. I'll admit that. Partially because now we homeschool. I have twin boys. Their phones they inherited our phones. And part of the need was so that they could have a hotspot when they're
Sure.
at cottage, communications, this sort of thing. But we're very controlling on what they can do on the phones. We're monitoring where they are, things like that. But it comes into the vein of they're getting to the age of cars. And we have made it very clear that a car requires two things. One, they will have to purchase the car. And the second is they will have to buy the insurance.
Yeah.
Which means they'll have to have a job, whatever. But I don't know if any of you have priced insurance. You do not.
Deep.
It is, you want it disconnected from you. But I was just going to point out on that thing.
So there are two things on this line that are very important. Number one, we lived in an age where I bought the car for our kids. It was always a used car, 4, 5, 6 years old, and it was still good. And I paid for it, and I paid for their repairs, but they had to pay for gasoline, and they had to pay for their insurance, because I wanted them to be responsible for what their rate was. And it got to be so bad with one of our daughters,
I was going to tell you.
that had 2 accidents, we kicked her off our insurance policy and put her onto her own policy because she was driving her up. So that's one way. And the other way is, because insurance is so expensive, a typical kid today is $300, $350 a month right out of the chute, okay? And if that's the case, it may be cheaper for you to go buy a $5,000 or $6,000 car, but then have them pay for the insurance. So, but the point being is they need to have some sweat equity in this, because unless they are really doing, and again, I'm making a broad brush statement, this is an absolute, unless they have no means for getting employment and need a vehicle, the odds are pretty good that they can wait for a year or two before they have to have a car.
Well, the odds are that once they'll have to get the job first.
Yes.
Of which case I will be their vehicle.
We understand that.
To and from
We've had
work.
that happen.
But I will tell you, it's harder today with cars than it was when we raised ours. Because the cars are more expensive. I can explain that some other time. And insurance is ridiculously more expensive. It's easily 3 or 4 times higher than when we had it. And it's hard. If you're paying $300 or $350 a month, that's a lot of money for a kid to have to earn. Just do it. Now, we can talk tomorrow about how that can be possible, but this is a tough problem.
Also, I have twin boys, so everything's double at the same time.
Been there.
We have twins too. so
We understand that.
And 4 other ones.
The clothing, I go to a lot of stuff that I dealt with when I was growing up. Now, I had a clothing allowance when I was a teenager. I was expected to buy most of my clothes from that, but I had the allowance was tied to work, which was maintaining the property at our house, and also I was a chauffeur for my father. There were all sorts of job requirements that went along with that, and as well, if I wanted extra money, I had to do extra jobs. So I babysat, mowed lawns, things like that. I also bought my first car when I was about 14. Just happened to get a deal. Now, I don't recall insurance. Gas was, you're talking 20 cents a gallon.
You know, say 29 cents a gallon.
Yeah, I had it was a company credit card because my father had a business, so I was tied to that, but I was very limited in what I could do with it. Meaning I could only, spend X amount. If I went over that, I had to, answer to the judge, so to speak, on that. But had a lot more responsibility, I remember, as I was a kid. And I try to encourage my boys to have the same responsibility, but it is very difficult.
It's very difficult today because they're going to be the exception.
Yep.
Yeah.
What other question do we have? We have one up here with Bill.
Do you know of any resources that would help parents? We have an 8-year-old boy, and I wish I would have grown up in your home, but I did not. My parents did not have the experience or the knowledge to teach us such financial, gifts. So do you have any reliable resources that we can maybe look up to teach children when they're young, consider this?
I will get those resources to Nathan, but the short answer is yes.
And I will pass those on. We still have one or two more questions. All right, I have one. Perfect. So going back to some things that we talked about earlier, looking for a home to buy, let's say, and you go to the bank and the bank says, we will loan you $200,000. Or the bank will say, yeah, we will loan you $300,000. What would be like a wise, should you buy a house that's where you're getting a $300,000 loan if that's like the maximum amount? Or how do you think about like how much of the loan to take? What's a good percentage to put down? Just some different thoughts.
So we'll start with the first principle earlier. Most people buy more house than they need in their first house. So right off the bat, 4 bedrooms isn't necessary. You may not even need 3 bedrooms. Point is, number one, buy less house. Number two, I tell everyone no less than 20% down payment. Minimum 20% down payment. I prefer 25%. You might think, well, that's only 5%. It's a big deal. But I prefer at least 25%, 20% down payment, and 25%. And here's the reason why. I buy a $200,000 house, but I only put 10% down on it. Okay? So I'm only putting that. So I'm borrowing $180,000. But I have to turn around and sell that house in a year or two. If it happens to be in a down cycle of the market, you get ready to then sell it with a real estate commission, and you'll probably have to pay $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 to get the house ready for sale. All of a sudden, you find out that you're going to have to write a check to leave that house because you have too little equity in it. So the starting point needs to be 20% or more, and that's the second piece that I would have. Buy less house than you can afford, and be able to put at least 20, preferably 25 or 30% down to build an equity bubble in the house. Because I will tell you right now, if you had a house that was a $200,000 house, you borrowed $40,000 on it, you only owe $160,000, and you need to get out of that house like tomorrow, and the house you can only sell it for $180,000. Well, you can fire sale the house, and you still have equity. But if you borrowed, put some people at 5% down, and now you've got a $200,000 house that's $190,000, and you owe, and all of a sudden you have to sell it, and you're going to be out. It's going to cost you. You can only sell it for $180,000. I'm sorry, you're underwater. The reason that equity is a big deal, I'll go back to the first example, you could approach someone who might have money and you need to get out of the house real quick. If you wanted to sell that house, which you bought for 200, but you only owe 160, I'll buy that house tomorrow for you for 160, and I'll turn around and wait a couple of months and sell it for 175 and make some money. But you could do that because you had the equity. So the key is buy less house than you can afford and put 25, preferably 30%, but 20 is the bare minimum, 20 to 30% down on the house.
We also used to say, don't qualify for your house on both your incomes if you're planning to have children, because one of you may need to stay home. You can't guarantee you're going to have a healthy child. You can't guarantee that there's going to be the child care available that you need. And if you have had to have both incomes to qualify for your house, then there is no way you're going to be able to afford your house and when you stay home, one of you stays home.
Yeah, and everyone will say, well, but I can't afford to buy a house. I said, well, I've known a lot of people that have 2 and 3 kids living in an apartment. I mean, you can live in an apartment and be a family.
For sure. Last question.
Would you say that the situation could be different? For example, we live in Europe, and the houses are much more expensive than here. So I would say like a one-family house in a more or less normal area costs around 700,000 or 800,000 euros, and so actually for no one it's possible to do 20 or 25% of a down payment. However, I think the taxes that you have to pay each year for the house are much lower than it is here. So would you say that this is a difference, and then you could go with a lower down
Yeah,
payment?
the 20 to 30% down payment would be kind of a US-based rule, not a European-based rule. And it also pertains to some degree on which state you're in. In our state, because we have no income tax, basically the number you can use, and I round it up, whatever the value of your house is, you multiply it by 3%, and that's what your property taxes are. And every year as the value of that house is going up, the property taxes are going up. And so clearly the more, this is really a retiree. So all of a sudden you're a retiree, and you're going to go buy a house, and you pay cash for it. Well, you pay cash for I'm super wealthy, paid everything. I paid $500,000 house. Guess what? You still owe $15,000 every year in real estate taxes. So you might not want to have a $500,000 house at that point in time because your income might be much lower. So back to Pete's question, the 20 to 30% is a US base, not a European base, but it also should be driven by the real estate taxes in your state, because you might be able to cheat a little bit on the lower percentage in states where it's low property taxes, but again, then they have high real income taxes. So depends on where your income's coming from.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. Sure.
Yeah, so this is really relevant to us and our situation. My wife and I, we have 3 kids. We're 29 and 28. And we're at a point where we took the route of we aggressively paid towards debt before we ever focused on saving, investing. So we're in a place of we don't really have much saved, but we're at the point of beginning that. But we're also renting. And so it's kind of what should be maybe what's the wisest first priority for us? Is it saving? Is it investing with saving? Or is it even having an eye on saving up for a down payment eventually?
First and foremost, I would save and invest before I would buy a house. And there's a real important reason for me saying that. Okay, so take this as not an absolute rule, but a general rule. The far majority of people in this state are not going to stay in the location or the job that they're in for much more than about 3 to 5 years. And if you buy a house, you can somewhat limit your job search. I also didn't say this earlier. Buy less house than you can afford, put 20 to 30% down. I'm not in the EU, but and then number 3, if you don't believe you're going to stay in your job for the next minimum 3, preferably 5 years, I wouldn't buy a house. Because sometime during that period of time, you may have to move, and then that may be the anchor that prevents you from taking another job. So I would save and invest. Now, this is a crazy statistic, but I'm teaching it so it's true. As of 2025, what is the average age of a first-time home buyer in the United States? I heard 30, 35, and 40. Who likes 30? Who likes 35? Who likes 40? In 2025, it reached 40. The first-time home buyer is 40. And the reason that's really important, that's a different message than what you're hearing on TV. Everyone owns a home. No, the average home in 2020, the first-time home buyer is now 40 years old. So now back to 28 and 29, I'd save and invest. I would love to see you, I would love to have you at age 30 put $25,000 aside into a retirement account, actively invest it, and never touch that $25,000. Because I know that puppy's going to be worth $1.1 million. And I might even be really excited if you put $50,000 at age 30 and you never touched it, knowing that you'll be worth $2.3 million 40 years later. And what freedom that buys you. That would be a better use of that money because your house is not going to appreciate near that much. And I can't tell you how important it is. There's a difference between asset value and cash flow. When you're in an apartment, you pay one fee, no repairs, no taxes, no extra insurance. Well, you get renter's insurance for $25 a month or whatever it is, okay? But in a house, you are paying, every year the taxes go up, every year the insurance goes up, every repair is yours. And I hate to tell you, unless you buy a brand new house, you're going to have an AC go out in the 5 years. You're going to have a major leak. I had bees in my eave, okay? Bees in the eave, $1,500. That's not covered by anyone to get rid of the bees and the eaves. You have saw this cash going out, lawn equipment, yard maintenance, water. I'm telling you, yes, 10 years later, if you own your house, your value may have gone up enough to kind of offset much of that cash flow. But the real thing that people don't understand owning a house is your cash flow runs about 20 to 30% higher per month owning a home than it does renting.
There you go. I'm going to pray to finish up our time. Mark and Debbie will be available to answer some more questions, and we will start at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Let's pray. God, we thank you for teaching us and leading us and guiding us through your word. We thank you for wise, mature Christians who take the wisdom from your word and live it out for decades so that they can pour that wisdom into us. We pray that we would not just hear wisdom, but that we would apply it to our lives so that we can live God-glorifying, blessed lives and be able to pour out wisdom to the next generation. And God, we pray that no one would feel discouraged this evening. Instead, people would be encouraged, knowing that you are with us every step of the way in all areas of life, including our finances. And we ask that you would help us to be wise and faithful people with our money. In Jesus' name, amen.